Hello, everybody. This is Noah and John, and we are from UrbanDigs. And Johnny, today we're talking Manhattan with Richard Haggerty, CEO of the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors and president of OneKey MLS. So he's got his pulse on a lot, and he is going to provide some interesting thoughts on an area that we don't really talk about that much.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about cities, suburbs, what's happening sort of in the region, less so Manhattan specifically. We're going to broaden the perspective a little bit today, and I couldn't think of a better guest, Noah.
Yeah, and that's what I like about it. Let's get away from Manhattan for a day and let's talk about New York City, Richard. Thank you for being here. Welcome to our show. And let's just start out high level with broader trends that you're seeing from your position.
Noah, John, it's great to be here. And it's interesting. I've been in the association real estate business since, I hate to say this, 1984. So it's been a lot of years. And one of the things we've always known about real estate is that it's cyclical. Yet we've been kind of stuck in one cycle for a long time. Low interest rates, tight inventory. And I think we got very used to that cycle and we thought, well, this isn't going to change. It's going to stay the same for as long as I'm going to be in the business. And now that we're starting to see an actual change in cycle, I think there are a lot of people who are scratching their heads because they haven't known anything else. But I think for those of us who have been in the business for a long time, we have been waiting for this change. And we've been talking about the fact that it's going to change for quite some time. And who knew that it was going to take a pandemic and a potential recession to create that change in the cycle. But we are definitely seeing a change in the market. I don't think anybody's surprised at that. I'm not surprised at that. I think we're all a little bit surprised that it took so long.
Right. And you're talking about regime change at the Fed in terms of their aggressiveness towards combating this inflation problem.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. So, Richard, if you could dust off the playbook from the 1980s, when I think that's probably the last time we saw inflation rates at not necessarily levels today, but at high levels that would sort of necessitate a changing environment. I'm curious, what are some of the lessons from then that you think might be applicable now?
We survived. That's the biggest one. Don't panic. And in fact, I don't think we're going to see the same depth of cycles that we saw back then. I do think that both the New York City and the suburban markets are seeing a change, but I think it's also being overplayed in the press. If you look at the numbers, we released our quarterly report just a couple of weeks ago, and I prefaced the report by saying it's a challenging task to compare the 2022 numbers to the 2021 numbers because 2021 was an overheated market. And it really is an unfair comparison from my perspective. So I compared the 2022 numbers to 2019, which is obviously pre-COVID, which was still a very strong market. And if you compare it to 2021, the overheated market, yet if you just look at Westchester, the suburban county just north of New York City, we were down about 14% in single family homes. Mm-hmm. You compare it to the 2019, we were actually ahead by 5.5%.
Right.
So I don't think that we should be, pulling the panic button yet, because I think we're still, the fundamentals are still there. I think, the increased interest rates have been baked into the market. And I still think that we are going to continue to do well, both in New York City and the greater suburban area. If you look at census numbers, we're not losing the tremendous number of people to other states like Florida and Texas, the way the press continues to portray it.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic, just your point about survival, I think is a fantastic point. And, Noah and I are former traders, and that is the number one rule, which is basically don't blow up, just survive to fight another day. And I think that that's, what a lot of folks need to be focused on here is just exactly what you're saying. Zoom out for a second and you look, and it's the same in Manhattan. If you just zoom out and you look at 2022's performance compared to the historical averages, it's right on the money. And I guess that brings me back, if I could kind of dig into this, that's one of the things that we saw during the pandemic was there was a bit of a shift to the suburbs, and a lot of those suburban markets got overheated. And, when we talk about that idea of survival, how can sellers in the suburbs these days and how do buyers, how can they react to the changing market in terms of, what inventory looks like and what prices are, versus say an overheated market as a comparison?
Well, the one thing, John, that hasn't come down, especially in the suburban market, are prices. Prices are continuing to accelerate at a slower pace, which is good. But I do think we need to see a price correction. And I think that's going to happen in the third and fourth quarter. And that almost needs to happen. Prices just have accelerated at too quick of a pace. And most of that's been driven, quite frankly, by lack of inventory. And that's a challenge that we can't necessarily control. My office, I live in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. My headquarters office is in White Plains. We also have offices in Bronx and in Goshen, New York. And we need to see more for sale construction happening. And right now what we're seeing is a lot of multifamily rental construction. And my concern is that with prices where they're at, with low inventory, not showing any signs of abating, more and more people are going to have no other option except to go into market rate rental housing, because that's where all the construction's happening right now. And I think that's unfortunate. We obviously believe that home ownership is a pathway to generational wealth. And I think we've got to continue to try to figure out ways of creating those opportunities.
Hey, Richard, are you already starting to see a slowdown in deal volume that, in your opinion, will ultimately reverse the course of this shortage of inventory? Because I mean, when I look at this cycle, and it's such a strange cycle to look at when you talk about regime change at the Fed, and I think that's such an underappreciated statement, by the way. I think a lot of people are not respecting it. There is no banking overextension this time. There is in a lot of areas, there's not a inventory problem. So what you're really getting is almost like a Fed-controlled demolition of demand destruction, in a sense, to a market that's not structurally kind of overheated. Even though prices have done their crazy things, there's these forces that like I said, the pandemic-related forces. So I'm wondering, this cycle, how deep and how long do you think this is going to encompass us?
You know what? I put my crystal ball away about 3 decades ago.
Well, you save your hair that way.
And whoever would have thought that Elizabeth Warren would be doing an op-ed piece arguing that the Fed should not be raising interest rates as aggressively as they are. But there's also a lot of buzz, I think probably you both are aware of this more than I am, that the Feds are being aggressive right now, but as soon as you see signs of a slowdown, which I think we're already seeing, they're going to start to back off pretty quickly. We're not going to know that until we know that. I think it's foolish to really try to predict the Fed's moves that much. However, I can tell you that even though interest rates have risen pretty dramatically, they haven't put the brakes necessarily on the housing market. I mean, even if you're looking in New York City, there are certain types of housing stock that are still really very competitive. If you're looking for a 1-bedroom co-op in the East Side, you're going to find plenty. If you're looking for a 2 or 3 bedroom condo on the West Side, you're going to have a tough time. So I don't think that this cooling off period is going to last all that long, which is really my deeper concern, which is we have to tackle the housing shortage problem. And especially in the suburban market. I mean, what's interesting is there were a lot of folks who did leave New York City during the pandemic. And it's an interesting study that Pattern for Progress just released this week. They're a think tank in the Lower Hudson Valley. And they got these numbers from the IRS, so they're super current. And folks moving into the Lower Hudson Valley, 48,642 of them came from New York City. Folks who moved from the suburbs, Lower Hudson Valley, into the city, 15,248. So that's a pretty big discrepancy there. But I still think that it's not the kind of numbers that were portrayed in the press. New York City is alive and thriving. I live there. I'm not moving to Florida. I'm not moving to Texas. And I think that that market's going to continue to do well, and the suburban market's going to continue to do well.
I second that point. I might not be in the city at this moment, but I do live there, and I was amazed to see the recovery take place in some of the and this is sort of an aside. It's sort of in the residential areas first, before sort of more of the the hipper hot areas like downtown and Greenwich Village. I mean, they're certainly lively, but the recovery really took place for me. The Upper West Side, the Upper East Side, they really started coming back faster. And, of course, driving through some of the suburbs, I mean, the downtown life in talk about Long Island, like Manhasset, some of those suburbs, Great Neck up, and then going up into Westchester, Sleepy Hollow, some of these areas. I mean, the little local areas were really lively post-pandemic. And, I kind of want to take that issue, and I'm going to change the subject. And I'd like to talk about data. You mentioned housing starts essentially, and, the inventory issues. And I think a lot of it comes down to, especially from an agent's level, about finding that stuff and making sure that you're tracking it properly. And I know you guys did a fantastic job building OneKey. And I wonder if you could talk about some of the issues you have or you've seen toward that data problem, whether that's getting clean data or disseminating it. And I'm just, curious what the data issue looks like from your end right now.
So OneKey MLS covers a very large territory. We're all from Montauk through Long Island, all the boroughs up in the Lower Hudson River Valley. And we have about, I think at this point, we have about 46,000 participating agents who subscribe to the service. I do think that our data is extremely strong in our footprint that includes all of that geography outside of Manhattan and Brooklyn. And the reason for that, and you gentlemen both know the challenges because of what you do with UrbanDigs, of trying to get accurate data in the city. And a big part of that is because MLS's multiple listing services exist in every other geography in the country except for New York City. There is OneKey's always covered Queens, and Brooklyn does have a very vibrant MLS, as does Staten Island, and we cover the Bronx. But I do think that there is not the same culture of agents entering clean data into one unified system where they are required to do certain things like timely put through a title pass when the property sells, where there's got to be square footage. So all the things that every other MLS takes for granted is more of a challenge in this market. Now, we do get a lot of data from New York City firms. We've had some success there, but we get a lot of data from data feeds, which is the same data feed that they use to exchange data amongst themselves. And that's limited in terms of the number of fields, and it's limited in terms of the quality of the data. And it's a challenge we've been battling for a couple of years. I think that we're making traction, but it creates a lot of challenges for all of the agents operating in that geography.
Yeah, and you know what? I think agents, they don't want this. The agents want clean data. I think deep down inside, they want good tools that come from the clean data. I think there's just a lot of structural issues going on here with disparate data feeds. And Richard, we're on the same side of the line here when it comes to data integrity, because we know exactly what you're talking about. And at the end of the day, the data is only as good as the agent that enters it into the system. And sometimes the system is going to have to have some controls and filters to protect itself from the agent itself trying to not put good data into the system. That does happen out there. I think it's an ongoing thing. I think a lot of agents are like, oh, why don't you just fix it and then be done with it? Like tomorrow there could be an issue that didn't exist today. Like this is the world that we live in. I don't think agents understand that. It's an ever evolving dynamic ecosystem of structurally inefficient data feeds. And here we are trying to make sense of it all. So thank you for doing what you're doing. And before I let you go, I have one last question, Richard. What do you see going ahead? Where is residential real estate headed? And what could agents do now to prep for what is coming down the road?
So I am bullish. I continue to be bullish. I think one of the reasons why we created OneKey is, from my perspective, we are covering the greatest geography in the world. New York City and the greater suburban area, and when I mention that, I'm talking also about Connecticut, certain parts of Connecticut and certain parts of New Jersey. That's very attractive real estate. And forget about the false narrative that everybody's leaving the city. I think agents have a unique opportunity, and the better agents have already taken advantage of that. They know they've got to be educated about the market. They know they have to have access to good data, and that's why you've got a very strong subscriber base, because people value your product because they know they can trust your product. And that's, I think, indicative of what agents have to do. They've got to get the best data. They've got to have, from my perspective, the best tools. And so long as they can deliver that value proposition to consumers, they're going to succeed, because this market's not going away. The one thing we didn't have time to talk about is the one missing ingredient that I definitely don't have a good pulse on is folks coming back into the city to actually work, to start to fill up that commercial space.
Yeah.
But I think that's going to sort itself out in the next 2 years. That's going to be a bit longer. That's not going to happen, I think, by the end of 2022. We're going to have to see how that plays out in 2023. But once that really starts to get more settled, I think this market is going to continue to boom. Yeah.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. That is actually a huge missing piece. And that's something that Noah and I have been talking about quite a bit, is that there's still a lot that remains to be done in terms of, the city getting back to its proper footing. I mean, we still have a lot of storefront retail that's waiting to be occupied. There's still a lot of office space waiting to be occupied. So there still is a wave of move-ins, or I'm not sure what the proper phrase is.
The depth of the buyer pool.
Right. Exactly. So that's a fantastic point.
Yeah, Richard, we think that we're not at full capacity, and our general secular bull thesis for New York City is based on the fact that our buyer pool is not at full capacity, and what we're missing is commercial and the retail and the foreign buyers and the foreign investors, and the rental market's doing its thing. So now we're getting investors potentially looking at our market because cap rates are interesting again. So it's a great market, and thank you for joining us today and sharing your thoughts on what you're seeing from your world over there. Richard Haggerty, CEO of the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors and president of OneKey. I am Noah Rosenblatt. That is John Walkup. This has been Talking Manhattan, and we'll catch you next time. Richard, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.